Thank you. Good evening, everyone. My name is Maria Navarro. I'm the superintendent of the Charles County Public Schools. Thank you for joining us. We had some technical difficulties, and so we're a little late to start. But I want to welcome you to the town hall conversation regarding our federal ESSER funding, and to hear from the community around how the school system can be looking at prioritizing the funding. What you will have today is a presentation to talk a little bit about the history of the federal funds that have come as part of the relief package regarding the impact of the pandemic. And we have staff here to go through how funds have been utilized in previous years. Moving forward for the ESSER 3 funds, we really wanted to engage the community both at a district-wide level and then more importantly at a local level by school with each community regarding how we should think about these funds. We submitted an initial grant because we had to submit some preliminary proposals. And frankly, as we implement this grant, I imagine as we try things as a school system that we will come back time and time again to amend the grant as we hear from educators, families, and those working with us on how to best utilize this grant. This is a 3-year extension of a grant, and so today is a first of several conversations. Again, this is a district level conversation, but schools and their school teams will be having specific community level conversations to think about what the community needs, what are the flexibilities, opportunities, barriers within their communities, so that more importantly, we can focus on supporting the re-engagement of students back into daily instruction, as well as supporting some major infrastructural developments that we need to do that we will use the funding for. So without any more sort of an introduction from me, I'm going to pass it to Mr. Kevin Lowndes, who will go through the presentation. There'll be a couple people chiming in. And then we opened up this session so that we also leave some time where we can have conversations. And you will also be getting a survey so that you can provide us more detailed information as we ramp up ideas about how to think about the best use for these funds. So thank you for being here with us this evening. And Kevin, I'll pass it to you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Navarro. Can we show the PowerPoint, please? Great. If we can go to the next slide. Great. Thank you. So as Dr. Navarro said, this evening we're going to talk a little bit about how the money that we've received for COVID since March of 2020 has been spent. We've received 3 pots of money since March of 2020. And tonight I'm brought a few people here to explain how that money has been spent and give the specifics. So everyone has a great understanding of the money that has come in, how it's been spent, and then what we're thinking about moving forward. And it's really the money that we're thinking about moving forward where we need your help and support tonight for you to give your input as to how we can support your children when we're moving forward in the next 3 years and we're catching our kids up with their learning that is needed because of the COVID over the last couple of years. So tonight I am joined by Mr. Michael Heim. He's the Assistant Superintendent of Supporting Services, and he'll talk about and share how the money has been spent to improve our facilities over the last couple of years and what we're thinking about moving forward. With technology, I have Ms. Charmaine Thompson. She's the Chief of Instructional Technology, and we have bought many new devices over the last couple of years, and she's going to explain how that money was spent to support our students in the distance learning and to support them now that they're back in schools. We have with us from Family Services, Dr. Michael Blanchard and Ms. Kathy Kiesling. They are going to share with us how we have spent some money to help with our students with their social emotional learning over the last couple of years and what we're thinking moving forward. And then we have Miss Megan Hungerford and Miss Melissa Meisowitz, who are here tonight to speak to you about how money has been spent to help catch our students up and to support them with the distance learning, but also what we're thinking about and moving forward to help our students in the future. Can we go to the next slide, please? If we can just go to the next. So Charles County Public School has been awarded $62 million since March of 2020. We've spent approximately $19.5 million through October 2021, and we still have $42.5 million to spend in the next 3 years. This breaks down to around $524 per pupil. And so, people see this money and they think of, wow, we have all of this money, and it helps to see how much does it mean per pupil when we break it down that way. This money has come in 3 different pots of money. The first set of money that came in is the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act, and that's the CARES Act. And within the CARES Act, there was ESSER 1. So I just want to explain the different ESSER money and the types of spending that has been spent with that money. The second type of pot of money that came in was the Coronavirus Response and Relief Supplemental Appropriations Act, and that was included ESSER 2. And then the last set of money that has come in that we applied for and received permission to spend is the American Rescue Plan Act, and that includes ESSER 3. So it really is our ESSER 3 money. We're here to speak to you tonight about how to spend our money moving forward. We can go to the next slide. But before we do that, I would like to talk a little bit about the money that has come in and how that money's been spent. And so the first set of pot of money that came in was the CARES Act money. And I'm going to turn it over now to Miss Charmaine Thompson to talk about the technology grant, and then to Miss Melissa and Miss Megan Hungerford to talk a little bit about the tutoring grant and how that money was spent. Charmaine?
Thank you, Mr. Lyles. Again, I'm Charmaine Thompson. And in the beginning, we were awarded roughly around $3 million. With that money, we immediately purchased one-on-one devices or laptop Windows devices for our high school students. As you are aware, we were not previously a one-to-one school district. So our immediate need when COVID happened was to ensure that our students had access to a learning device. So that first pot of money was spent, and each device averaged around $500. So just on technology by itself, at least for the high school students initially, we were already using up per pupil amount for that 3 years. So we used that grant initially to purchase those devices for students. And later in this presentation, I'll share with you the other pots of money that we use to supply devices for our middle and our elementary kids. Next up is the tutoring grant.
So last school year, we were given a little over $1 million in the form of a tutoring grant. We had a very short period of time to spend this grant on tutoring services. If you'll remember, we offered a centralized tutoring support service for students where parents could contact the school or contact central office to request tutoring, and we had a staff member who worked with families to match a time and a tutor with the student's needs. And it just ran for a little over a month. It was a very short period of time that we ran that service. We also used that money to purchase various software programs for some reading and math interventions and some literacy interventions. Have you heard anything I'm forgetting?
I'm sorry, at the elementary level, it was not system-wide pushed out. We gave each school kind of an allotment of seats for tutoring, and they provided it through their staff members in a very direct, strategic way to ensure that elementary students aren't as inclined to just grab onto tutoring. So it was pushed out through the schools.
Thank you. And also included in that CARES Act was money for food and nutrition to make sure that we were able to feed our families during the time period where our students were home in the distance learning. If we can go to the next slide, please. So the next pot of money, and before I explain a little of this, I want folks to understand that. So when the money does come in, there's some restrictions on how school systems can spend this money. Some of it is targeted within specific grants, and others is money that we have to apply for, and it allows us to use it in a variety of ways. So that's why you're going to see within the boxes, the gray and the orange boxes, grants with specific names on them, and also there's other areas that we have a little bit more freedom as to how we want to spend it. But it all has to be related to making sure that we're spending it to deal with the pandemic that's going on right now. So I just want everyone to understand that. So the next pot of money it did include ESSER 2. And then with ESSER 2, I'm going to start with Mr. Michael Himes to talk a little bit about the facility upgrades that we were able to provide during that because of that money that came in. Mr. Himes?
Good evening, everyone. First of all, some things that were purchased and are already in place. Number one, we purchased 50 air purifiers or air filters this summer, and we received them before the start of the school year. We made an internal decision to place them in the isolation rooms for when the school year began. In the event that we had a sick staff member or a sick student, we would have that purification system in that isolation room where those students would be held until the parent was picked up, or in case of a staff member, until that staff member was sent home. So again, those have been in place in the isolation room since the beginning of the school year. And looking long term, hopefully when we get to the point that we no longer need an isolation room in each of our schools, the long-term plan is then to relocate them to the health suites or the nurse's office in each school, because they are portable units. And we spent approximately $130,000 purchasing those 50 units. A second source that we spent money on, and we're in the process of receiving them now, are BARD units, or unit ventilators for relocatable classrooms. Relocatable classrooms, or more commonly known as portable classrooms or trailers that are located at our schools, are not connected to the central HVAC system of the school. So they have their own individual units which heat and cool those units. Some of those relocatable classrooms are over 20 years of age, meaning the units are over 20 years and are ending near the end of their life cycle. So we purchased 35 BARD units for 35 relocatable classrooms, and we will swap out 35 of those older units with the new unit, which is obviously going to be more efficient, but it's also, besides being more efficient and using less energy, it's more efficient at controlling fresh air intake into those classrooms. So we purchased 50 of those for a total of $464,000. And a third source, which we are spending that first pot of money on ESSER 2 on, is a major HVAC upgrade replacement at La Plata High School. La Plata High School opened in 1979, and for the most part, that unit is the original unit to that school. So as part of that, we are looking at redoing ductwork in that school for movement of air in the school, also looking at replacing the cooling tower and the chiller, which are used for the AC for the cooling season, and also replacing rooftop units and adding additional dampers. And the rooftop units and dampers were part of the system, which allows us to, again, control how much fresh air we bring into a building. And for those of you that have been following along during this pandemic, the CDC and ASHRAE, which is a group of engineers involved in heating and air conditioning along with refrigeration, highly recommend as a part of one of your mitigation strategies for helping to control the spread of COVID in schools and in classrooms is increasing the amount of fresh air or increasing the amount of air changes that take place over the course of an hour. So as part of that major upgrade renovation to La Plata's system, we'll be having a system we'll be able to control more freely in terms of controlling the amount of fresh air in. As I mentioned, same thing with the barred units for the relocatable classrooms. Overall, the HVA system at La Plata will be more efficient. We'll also see future cost savings by using a more efficient and more modern HVA system to heat and control that building, along with controlling humidity levels in that building. So, Mr. Lowndes, I turn it back to you.
Thank you, Mr. Heim. At this time, I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Hungerford. She's going to talk a little bit about the iReady. And then from there, I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Kiesling, who's going to talk about the Family Coordinator for Student Services.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody, or I guess good evening. We purchased iReady, which is an assessment program. It's computerized. It is computer adaptive. It has been used widely across the country with phenomenal results. And what it helps us do is diagnose student strengths and student needs. We are currently using this as a diagnostic tool in grades 1 through 9 in reading and math. And what we're doing with this is we administer it in the fall, winter, and spring. And that helps us determine by specific skill and standard where students have appropriate learning and where they may need assistance or where they might be advanced and therefore need some enrichment. We have been working very diligently with our schools to conduct data dives now that our fall diagnostic is completed. In a very short time, I believe sometime in early December, parents will be getting a full report on their students' progress through the fall diagnostic. Again, we will administer again, January through, and again at the end of the year. Each student, there is a student growth goal developed, and then through this program, teachers can go in and use the software to look specifically at lessons and resources that they can use with their students and groups of students, small groups of students, to accelerate the learning where there is need for growth. So that was a very big item that we felt our system needed, a consistent and reliable growth measure we could use across all schools and the majority of the grade levels to ensure that we are tracking our data and using data to drive instruction.
Ms. Hungerford or Ms. Miser, either one of you want to talk a little bit about the materials of instruction in the summer programming?
Sure, I can take that one. So good evening, everyone, again. We used a large portion of this funding to staff and run our summer programs for this past summer. We had a number of programs going on this summer, from our summer boost programs, summer school that was offered to students for free, and we expanded our summer school offerings, our summer enrichment programs and camp, and our CPE enrichment and exploration programs. So this funding paid for our staffing, our materials of instruction for all of those programs, and transportation costs.
Thank you. Ms. Kiesling, if you would like to speak a little bit about the Family Coordinator for Student Services in the summer clinic.
Sure. Good evening. I'm Kathy Kiesling, Director of Student Services. We had the funds that we used for the Family Coordinator position went to a position that we hired for helping with our international registrations. We had a large influx of students coming in and a great need for extra support in that area. We only had one staff member working with the families of those coming in through the international registration process. So the Family Coordinator position helped with the registration process and the outreach and to those families, and any kind of supports that they may need. That person also supports our facilitator in that area. So that Family Coordinator position was very needed with like I said, the growth of the international registrations that we were finding throughout this summertime, and that will continue for the next 2 to 3 years. We also had our parent summer clinic being held where we opened up workshops for families to support them with mental health supports and ideas for students and children during the summer months. So we had families that joined our staff, counselors and school psychologists who ran those clinics throughout the summer and offered different types of workshops and supports for families throughout the time that schools were closed, realizing that we needed all those extra supports with the closure of COVID and wanting to help our parents be better prepared to support their kids coming back to school. So that's where the funding went from this part of the grant.
Great, thank you very much. And there, within this appropriations, there was a targeted grant that school systems could apply for, which was targeted for working with our Black male students to help them be more academically successful. And we had 2 schools that did apply for that grant, Westlake High School and J.P. Ryan. Both of them did receive the grant and are working with their communities and working with their students within their schools to address the achievement for their Black students within their schools. So that is one of the areas that was a targeted portion of the money that school systems had to apply for. We can go to the next. I think, Ms. Thompson, if you want to talk a little bit about the next broadband for unserved students.
Sure. Before I jump right into the broadband, I also wanted to hop back on the first slide when we were discussing devices. I also wanted to ensure that you understood that we purchased about 9,500 laptops for high school students. And we also, with ESSER 1 grant, we purchased about 7,000 laptops for middle school students. So roughly in the first pot of money, we had about 2/3 of our students that we were able to purchase devices for. With ESSER 2 funding, we were able to purchase an additional 14,000 devices for our elementary students. We're still waiting about, 20% of that orders has yet to come in. We just got notification that order has come in. It's being barcoded and will go to schools this week. So in total, we've purchased roughly over 30,000 devices for all of our students utilizing the CARES Act and ESSER 1 and 2 funding. Another big part of funding that we used was to purchase broadband for our unserved students. So what that means, we were able to purchase roughly about 1,600 hotspots. They were valued at about $633 each. What that price included, that hotspot used Verizon service. So we purchased the service for an entire school year. We actually just extended those hotspots for another year, which was roughly $1 million. We actually utilized some local funding to offset the cost as well as E-rate funding. And we also extended our wireless access in all of the parking lots of our schools. And the reason we did that, when schools were closed, we opened up the parking lots for Wi-Fi access so that families could just come into the parking lots and connect to our internet. Now, to be honest, the hotspots were a Band-Aid solution because, as we know, Charles County has some rural areas that even with a hotspot, those devices would not work. So we also opened up internet cafes in some of our schools where those families could come in and access our internet network. We also are working with Charles County government. They were awarded a $6 million grant to broaden broadband in some of these really rural areas, Cobb Neck and Nanjemoy. That is roughly a 3-year project. So even though in the interim we were able to do internet cafes and provide hotspots to students, Charles County government is working on a larger project to build out broadband in these rural areas so that even when we do give a student a hotspot, it will work. So just wanted you to know that we are also working in coordination with Charles County government. Now that that's our project, we're working with them, providing street that don't have access for our students so that they can hopefully prioritize some of this development work. But I just wanted to make sure I went over that. Ready for the next slide?
So the last pot of money that has come in is this pot of money that we want to talk about tonight, and get your input as to how we should be spending it and how we can be supporting your students at this time, your sons and daughters at this time. So I'm going to have Ms. Kiesling speak a little bit about some targeted money that came in for homeless use and what we're spending on that. And then we can then hear a little bit about some of the other ideas that we have for spending for our ESSER 3 money. But as of right now, you know, I'm going to go over the timeline that the grant came in and what we had to present, because you'll find on our website there is a plan for our ESSER 3, but the idea is to get your input tonight and then move some of that money around after hearing from our communities and our schools as to what they feel they need the money for to address the pandemic. Ms. Kiesling.
I'm unmuted. Okay. I'm going to turn this over to Miss Bethany Goodwin. She is our homeless and foster care youth and transition coordinator for the county, and she manages the grant for the homeless children and the youth fund.
Right. So currently, the two grants from the American Rescue Plan, we still have not received our official approval for the grant. But the first grant was submitted in June, the $129,000, and then we're submitting the application for the $276,000 for the American Rescue Plan grants, which are pretty much guaranteed that we will receive the funding. The funding will primarily be devoted to ELO, extended learning opportunities, tutoring, during school, after school programs, and enrichment programs for our homeless students to assist any of our homeless students that are displaced and any gaps in learning that might have occurred during COVID, to assist them moving forward and with their academic achievement through this school year. And it will even fund summer programs and participation in summer enrichment programs as well. Other parts of the funds will be used to meet the student needs so they can successfully attend and participate in school, such as covering student fees needed to participate in their different classes, field trips, and also wraparound services that can include referrals for dental, vision, medical services, and also wraparound mental health services, including counseling. We can provide that for our displaced students as well. And then we also have a pocket of money that's going to go towards emergency funds for our students.
Great, thank you very much. And like I said, for our ESSER 3, these are some of the areas that we have spent some money on, but we are thinking about how to spend our money in the future. And if we can go to the next slide, because there's some specific grants that I would like to highlight here that came through the American Rescue Act. One of them was the summer school grant, and that was for 2021. And we spoke a little bit about the summer school program that we provided this past summer. The other was a school reopening grant, which talked about materials of instruction. And we spent some things this year to make sure that we had everything in place for our CTE programs. We talked about the iReady and then materials of instruction to support some of our virtual program. We do have a virtual program going on right now where we have 2 classes in every grade, kindergarten through 8th grade, and we're supporting that through this money. And then we have the trauma and behavior health grant that has come through, and I'm going to Dr. Michael Blanchard talk a little bit about how that money is being spent. Dr. Blanchard.
Good evening, everyone. So we have targeted a number of areas. So as you can see here, that was $364,000. There's another grant as well. That was a larger amount that we can talk about in a little while as well. But this particular grant was, we talked about a number of different things to address, in essence, the losses we know our students would experience due to the virtual learning They were in for about a year and a half. We continue to have concerns about the mental health of our students, so we're trying to do a number of programming to support that. You can see here just a list of them. This is not an exhaustive list. There's other ones as well, but I'll hit the highlights. Motivational speakers, we're giving a certain amount of money to all our middle and high schools. And this is for either staff or students to bring in speakers to talk about being excited about being back at school, ways to stay motivated, continue to learn, and ways for our staff to stay motivated to work with our students. Parent workshops, we're offering parent workshops in the evenings. And they're going to be based on a number of topics, but they're all going to be more mental health, behavioral health, trauma-based. Information will be coming out about that. We're offering professional development opportunities for our staff around things along the lines of trauma-informed schools, behavioral supports for students, ways to de-escalate behaviors that we have concerns about with our students. There's a mentoring program that is now in 9 of our elementary schools, all of our Title I buildings. And that's called the HERO program. And Ms. Giesler can provide more details about that if there's specific questions. You see here something called Crisis Prevention Institute training. Any staff who work with students who may have more severe behaviors, we train them in verbal de-escalation techniques. And a lot of the focus of that is ways to de-escalate student behavior before it becomes a situation where harm could come to a student or to other people. We're expanding that training around verbal de-escalation to as many staff as we can reach. As we've also offered professional development for our classified staff. And when we say classified staff, there are bus drivers, our food service workers, our IAs, bus attendants, and so on. That took place over the summer, and that was talking about issues around trauma-informed schools as well as verbal de-escalation. Because they're also staff that work with our students every day. They work hand in hand with our certified staff, our teachers, as an example, to support students. And then obviously we have materials and instruction and resources for our mental health staff, our school counselors, school psychologists, personnel workers, materials, so they can provide individual and group counseling and so on. And you see here testing equipment. One of the things, and as a supervising school psychologist, we have seen an uptick in our referrals for students for evaluation for special ed. So we've had to provide the necessary equipment for our staff to be able to do that. Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Blanchard. We can go to the next slide. And here's some other supplemental grants that are in the American Rescue Plan Act that I just want to make sure that everyone has an understanding of. We do have some summer school grant money for this coming summer, once again, to address the learning loss. We have some trauma behavioral health grant where we are working with Tri-County Youth Services. We're providing some services within our schools, joining with them. We have a transitional supplemental instructional grant. This is providing math intervention for grades kindergarten through 3rd. It has to be targeted towards those grade levels. And then we have a supplemental instructional grant for tutoring, and this is grades 4 through 12. So the state broke it out in 2 different grants. One was targeted for our kindergarten through 3rd grade, and the other was targeted to our 4th grade through 12th grades. We can go to the next slide. Now, here's the timeline that ESSER 3 came in, because I know some of you might be wondering, we're getting our input tonight, but the grant was already submitted. And so the reason why we're doing that is because the grant, as you can see, came in on June 25th. It was released to Charles County Public Schools, and originally we were told that it was due July 30th. So we had very little time to look what was in the grant, the requirement of the grant, and then to apply for the grant. Ultimately, we found out right before July 30th that it was going to be extended. And so it was by August 17th that the grant had to be submitted to MSDE, Maryland State Department of Education. We heard back on October 4th that we were conditionally approved. But at that time, we asked very specific questions about when we go out and we talk to the community. We wanted to make sure that we were able to amend the grant and move some of the money to maybe some targeted areas that our community would like us to spend the money on. We were told at that time that would not be a problem. And then on October 22nd, we did receive the final grant approval from MSDE. I just want to remind everyone that the money has to be spent by September 30th, 2024. So there is a limited amount of time, and that we have to make sure that our programs are up and running, and that whatever it is that we would like to spend our money is spent by that time. If we can go to the next slide. Talk a little bit about the ESSER 3, and when you're thinking about how you feel or what you believe Charles County Public Schools should be spending their money on, I want to make sure that you understand that unlike ESSER 1 and ESSER 2 funds, our ESSER 3 funds, 20% of them have to be addressing our learning loss, and it has to be spent on evidence-based interventions to make sure that our students have an opportunity to make up for the learning that was lost in the distance learning. Go to the next slide, please. And then I believe there was one other slide before this or after this. If we can go to yes. So our other restrictions for our ESSER 3 funding is that it can be spent on school facilities, repairs and improvement, just like our ESSER 1 and 2. It can be providing our school leaders with resources necessary for their individual schools to address the learning loss that are specific to their schools. And it can be on looking at our systems and our processes and looking at how we can possibly upgrade them and spending money towards the upgrading of systems to help us in response to local education. If you can go back to that other slide. So I want to speak tonight. We're having a community meeting to get your input. We will be speaking about our ESSER spending at our next board meeting. And then we have given each one of our school principals an application for them to apply for funding to address specific items at their school to help their students get caught up. So it can be spent on tutoring. It can be spent on a social emotional program that they feel their students would benefit from during this time period. And they can tie that into an educational program to help their students be motivated to do their math or their English or whatever. But while they're developing their local plans, we've asked all our principals to make sure that they do get community input and to address the issues that their communities feel like their students need during this time period. You can go to the next slide. The next one. Okay, so at this time we would like your input, and we're going to ask you to do a survey. If you can take your camera and put it right up to that QR code, a survey will pop up. But we will also be answering questions. If folks want to raise your hand, we'll be putting you off mute, and you can go ahead and ask questions. And if it's a question that I can answer, I'll answer it. But if someone else within the panel is specific to their area, they will also be taking the time to answer your questions. So at this time, if you can use your emoji or whatever that is to raise your hand within the chat box.
Ms. McLaughlin.
Hi, I have 4 questions, but I'm hoping that they're really easy ones. But as I was listening to you talk about the wraparound services that would be made available to students with some of this funding, I believe maybe that was Ms. Goodwin who was speaking. Is that in addition to money that can be coming through the blueprint for Maryland's Future for community schools? Because I know that community schools traditionally do wraparound services for their schools.
But this time,
So right now we have, Ms. McLaughlin, we have one community school, and that is Dr. Mudd Elementary School, and I am the community school liaison for the school district. And for the community schools can provide wraparound services, but that for all their students within the Dr. Mudd school community. However, and that does include McKinney-Vento students attending Dr. Mudd Elementary, but the funds for wraparound services, including counseling or medical, dental, vision services through the American Rescue Plan funds, those are for all McKinney-Vento homeless students throughout the entire school district.
Okay, thank you. That really clears that up. Can I ask another question, or do you want me to wait until someone else has had a chance to ask their question and then put my hand up again?
You can go ahead and ask.
Okay. The other questions that I had were about, well, two of them were about the social emotional programs that that you were talking about, and part of the money, I believe Dr. Blanchard was talking about this, was included, and one of the bullets was restorative practices. And I was wondering, what does that support look like? What is that funding being kind of targeted at with restorative practices with respect to that? Because I know that we have a fabulous program in the elementary schools called Move This World, but they don't have something similar in the middle and high schools. Is that where the restorative practices are coming in, or are those two separate things?
Actually, it's two separate things. Can you hear me okay, Ms. McLaughlin? It's Mike Blanchard.
Yes.
Okay. So there's two separate issues. The first piece is the restorative practices. What happens is, as a school system, and Ms. McLaughlin, you may be aware, a couple of years ago, we were moving very hard in training, not only our training folks to train, not only training our trainers, but then training our staff to provide restorative practices in our schools. Then COVID hit. So there was a bit of a pause in the training. So what we did is we tried to build money into this next ESSER funding to train more trainers to get the program up and running again, to ensure that our staff, we have the appropriate people to train our staff to start providing the programs in earnest in our buildings, because it's desperately needed. In reference to the Move This World, it's a little bit different. Move This World is a social and emotional program in all of our elementaries. This is for the public. All of our elementary schools show this in the morning and the afternoon. It's a really neat program. I'll let Ms. Kiesling talk in more detail, because this is really her brainchild and she loves talking about it. But as far as how it's not in our secondary schools, but we have a program called BASE, which is very similar, and I'll let her talk about that as well, that also addresses very similar topics of This World.
Okay, so this is Mrs. Kiesling again, and yes, we have moved this world in all our elementary schools, but we also were able to move it into our 6th grade this year. So that was a very big yes. We're very excited about that, and we have most of our schools right now that are using the program on a regular basis. And if you watch the tweet come out, you'll see that a few of our schools are doing very well with that in terms of the 6th graders having that program on a regular basis. So we're very happy about that. But our base program is for our secondary schools, and that has been in place for the last 2 years. It is based on the same kind of social emotional learning platforms that comes forward in the elementary schools with Move This World, but they're more modules that the students are assigned based on some of the concerns or issues, or even just some of the things that they feel they may need support with. So those modules can be assigned to students individually at the schools, and they have the opportunity to also access those at home as well. And that's for all secondary students.
Thank you very much. I'm really glad to hear that. And I have one more small question, and then I will stop asking questions. The supplemental and instructional and tutoring grant that you talked about for grades 4 through 12, is that for all subjects, or is that for primarily math and reading?
So at the elementary level, and again, it only goes 4th grade and up, so it's 4 and 5. It is for reading and math specifically. And Mrs. Meisowitz can speak to secondary.
At the secondary level, it will be the 4 cores and then world language as well. Woohoo, world language.
Okay, thank you. Sorry. Thank you very much for answering all my questions, and I won't ask any more right now. I will probably have more later because that's me, but thank you very much.
Tara Soul. I hope I'm saying your name correctly. I apologize if I'm not.
You said it perfectly. Thank you so much.
Great.
So my question kind of piggybacks on Linda's question about the secondary, because I'm a secondary teacher. So the tutoring money for the secondary, my question is very simple. Does that mean there's funding now for an activity bus?
Hi, Ms.
If,
Sewell.
hi, Ms. Meisowitz. That's of course assuming that the proposal was properly made and whatever the logistics were made and da 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 da. And I say that because as a teacher, what we say often, if we just had an activity bus, the kids could stay after school, we could get them home. Oh, we could help them, blase, blase, blue. And I'm just letting you know. I'm just saying it. And yeah, we're tired. I got a lot of other issues. But we would help them if we could get them home. We can't take them home, but they need to go somewhere. So
I can talk about that one. So we have spoken to transportation, and we asked about the secondary. And what they have said is because of the runs and the time that transportation gets out, it's difficult to get the elementary schools home and to do it right after school. But they are willing to take them home later, after 5 o'clock, if the programs can begin later. So we did let principals know that if they wanted transportation and activity buses, they would have to start their programs later because it would have to be, the buses need to be available in order to drive the students home.
But Ms. Sewell, I want to also ask, as you are thinking about an awesome proposal that I know is going to come from your building, and that's exactly what we've asked schools to do. Go out there. We haven't put necessarily like a whole bunch of boundaries around this or that. We're asking them, go out to your community, figure out what works for your school community, what's the best plan that you can bring forward, and bring that to us. I also want to put a plug out there, since I see a couple of folks from schools, to think about whether or not families would also be interested in having their kids access something virtually after hours. So you know how they also go home and get a snack and figure out whatever it is that they're going to do, and they do homework, but there's a lag time between homework and going to bed. And I'm curious if there's also an interest from staff to be able to do the same, go pick up their kids, get home, get everybody settled, and then do some kind of tutoring. And I don't know if that works best for elementary or secondary, but I want to shoot as many ideas. This is the time when we need to shoot as many ideas out, and then also have our parents in different communities say, hey, that works really, really well, because after this time, for this half hour, for this hour would be a good time. So just please feel free to think through with your community, what are some good options, and offer us a couple of different options. It would be nice if schools also sent forward with their community input a couple of different options forward. So thank you so much for bringing that question up.
Pascal Small.
Hi, good evening. I have a couple questions, and thank you for this share out. I keep hearing things like evidence-based interventions and practices, and that sounds great, but what exactly do you mean by that? Which ones are we exploring, and who's running that? And also, do families have any input on what evidence-based practices we would like to see? That's my first question. I have more, but can someone answer that one first?
Well, I'll go ahead and start. So when we adopt materials of instruction or programs that are evidence-based, what happens is the content specialists research that. The programs, the vendors often have what we call white papers. White papers are research that they have used and they have evidence of the efficacy of a program in other places. So we look at that. In the past, it used to be research-based, and now it's evidence-based. But basically, it means that before we purchase any product or any program or any assessment component like iReady, we look very carefully. Oftentimes, we also go beyond that, and we reach out to other districts that we know are using the program, and we say, okay, it says this on paper, tell us if that really translates in the real world. So that's what evidence-based means. And yes, we do our homework, because we want it to be something that is effective, can be implemented with a reasonable workload on our teachers, and will yield results for our students.
I would just like to put a little seed to that one of making sure that it's also community and family vetted. So maybe getting some parents also on a council and just asking for our feedback in that. And that could be one meaningful way to bring us to that decision-making table. But thank you for that answer. Also, how do you plan to increase, because I heard this as well, we're trying to accelerate learning. We're trying to make sure that, students are caught up. How do we plan to increase learning time for students who need it the most? What targeted investments do you believe will have the biggest impact on students? And how are we tracking success? What does that look like to us at CCPS?
So let me start that, and then I'll have staff add to it. I think first and foremost, we are looking the iReady assessment that everybody took. We have a diagnostic assessment. I invite everybody around this call to come to the presentation that we'll be doing to the board on the fall diagnostic assessment to see where our students are. That data should drive the way that the schools were given sort of a proposal template, should drive how schools are emphasizing who needs what support in what areas and how far away are they from grade level expectations. And the reason we have iReady now moving forward is so that we could use a tool that had a national norm beyond just Charles County doing running records or other sort of localized data indicators to be able to compare ourselves with kids in Maryland and to compare with kids nationally so we can look at progress. So there is the comparison to self and others, and then there's a comparison, and then there's a growth component that would tell you how the students are progressing. So we plan to use the iReady. I'm sure they have other indicators, but as a base indicator to see the impact of the students that we're working with. The other thing I think is important is as the team is flushing out through a couple of different ways, let's say around reading, is that we should have within, as we embed tutoring options for students, we should embed an ongoing assessment within those tutoring options to progress monitor for growth. Even if the teacher is not doing the tutoring, the classroom teacher, him or herself, those results would go back to the teacher so that he or she can progress monitor what has been the impact of those indicators. We will have a lot of accountability on us to sort of say, where did the dollars go? And it's sometimes easy. I mean, not that it's easy for Charmaine or Mike, but if it's a HVAC system, ventilator system, you can go and see it in a building. If it's devices and how they went, you can count them and put them in there. So for the academic perspective of this, is very much going to be those indicators of like the iReady assessments that follow through with students. And then prioritizing the student population that we prioritize primarily. Now, I will tell you, the pandemic has had effects on everybody academically. So it's no longer the conversation both locally and nationally. Are we just focusing on early grades or are we focusing in middle school? The reality is from looking at these assessments is that we have lesser of an impact to an extent at some points in middle school and somewhat in high school, but there's impacts throughout. So we're really going to have to think about how to, while before the dollars were like for specific students or a small group of students, I think the numbers of students sort of impacted that are maybe one grade level or two grade levels behind or more is vastly higher than in previous years. That's not just here in Charles County. So we're going to have to address a lot of more kids' needs.
Thank you, Dr. Navarro. I know you and I share a passion for data and analytics, and I would just say if we can put a seed on making sure that it's equitable, even though, yes, we've all been affected, there are certain students that we all know that have been historically marginalized, may need more. Let's make sure to keep that lens. I think I have one more question. I want to hear from others to see if there's other questions, and then I'll have more questions later if we have time, but I want to leave time for others. But I love that sense of looking to see what is working, what is not working. So how do you plan on regularly reporting out to the community on what is and not working beyond just the board meetings? Because I feel like it needs to be more timely. And is there a way for, again, families to be more engaged prior to the plans being fully baked? That could be a parent council. That could be through surveys as this one that I just scanned on my QR code. But as you see, families from last year, you asked us to be more engaged, and now we are fully engaged. How will you continue to engage us prior to plans being, fully baked?
So I can address, one of the area, and you asked the last question as well, the flexibility piece. And so one of the things that the schools have is the flexibility of running their programs both during the school day if they wanted targeting tutoring during the school day, or running some programs after school. And so hopefully, our communities will take an interest and will, voice to their schools what it is that they want to help catch their students up and when they want. Some of the tutoring programs that we're looking at, because what we're hearing from many of our teachers is that, they need some more help and more support with bodies and tutoring our students, is that we're looking at getting some of these virtual tutoring programs to be a little bit more flexible with our families and to be able to provide more on-demand tutoring, and providing that as an option to the school to prevent to their communities if that's something they're interested in. And so we are looking at a bunch of different options to provide more flexibility, because that's one thing we've realized is that there's not one size that fits all. But what the research is showing is that the targeted tutoring, specifically working with small groups of students, seems to be the most effective to help catch our students up.
Thank you. I appreciate that accommodations piece. Can you answer the other one though, of like how we'll continue to engage families, maybe through either parent council or, bringing us more prior to when the plans are baked? And then I'll put myself on mute.
So one of the things that Dr. Navarro talked about is there is a lot of accountability with this money that we have to provide, not only the programs that we want to offer, but how are we going to determine whether it was successful or not. So we are going to use iReady to determine if our students are getting caught up with the reading. And there's other formal and informal assessments that we're going to be looking at. But we've also asked schools, when they're looking at the programs that they want to offer, how are they going to determine whether that's successful? Because that's something we have to report out to the state as to what each individual programs, how are you determining whether it's successful or not?
Thank you. I'm going to let Linda ask some questions, and then maybe I'll have some more if we have the time.
Hi, Ms. McLaughlin. Go ahead and start.
Okay, thank you. I just, as I was listening to the answers to some of those other questions, I was just thinking about when you said all the principals have applications to apply for funding that will help their schools. I am wondering if, because I was also sitting here doing the QR code and that survey, is it possible for the principals to have like a survey template that they can craft to create the best data tool for their community, but it would also be consistent with what the school system is asking everyone, so that the feedback can be viewed by the system, and you can see, and it would be consistent across the entire system. Does that make sense? I'm wondering if that's a possibility to help our administrators send out something to their constituents, basically, that will help the parents to give the same types of answers to the same types of questions. So as we look at it across the county, we can see what we need.
Well, actually, Ms. McLaughlin, when it came to the extended learning opportunities, this is Mrs. Hungerford, we did send out a template. It was not a block template. It was one that they can then take and personalize for their school. They can adjust. But yes, we did send out kind of a template and this was just for extended learning opportunities, but it provided them some suggested questions that people might consider. Some things came up today, such as, would you only be able to participate if you had transportation? Would you want components that involved SEL as well as academics? What would your priorities be, etc.? So that was provided to principals for ELOs. I'm not sure.
Ms. Small, do you have another question?
I do. I have two. I wanted to start off first with bridging the digital divide. Ms. Thompson, can we see a plan of how we're working with Charles County government on bridging that? Because that was super interesting what you were talking about, that some of this money will go to bridging the digital divide, but it'd be great to see how exactly that's going to happen. And how each community is going to be impacted. Again, is it equitable? Are we looking at different zones with students that are most in need? So if there's a way or if there's a plan somewhere that you can.
Yeah, there is a presentation that I attended with Charles County government that details the full broadband, rural broadband plan. Let me double check with their project manager if I can share it with you, or we can find a way to post it. I think it may be public on the Charles County government site, but I'll find it and share it with the community at large. There is a plan. It's roughly 3 years, 2.5, 5 years to be exact. The company they are partnering with is Think Big, and matter of fact, it is public because we did a presentation to the commissioners that the public was welcome to attend. But certainly I will share that. But that plan does detail its 3 levels: Category 1, Category 2, and then Category 3, whereas Category 1 areas are areas that have no connectivity at all. There's no Verizon accessibility, there's no Comcast. So they're targeting those areas first, which I believe are Cobb Neck and Nanjamoy. Then there's Category 2, where there are areas where they can get connectivity, but it's spotty, meaning they may have to go to their end of their driveway. And then there's Category 3 areas where, again, it's kind of spotty throughout, but there's connectivity. For instance, it may be you have connectivity to, say, a company, yet your neighbor does not. So I do know they're hitting the Category 1 areas first, but certainly I'll find that presentation and make sure it's okay that I share it. If not, I can send you the link and we can share that on our website as well.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I know Common Sense Media is also working on that at a national level. In terms also, just to get clarification for me and for the parents that are tuning in, for our APR ESSER, and this question could be for anybody, is this then a multi-year commitment for the spending plan? Is it that we would make adjustments every year, or how would that go?
So it is a multi-year grant. I think Kevin mentioned that it has to be spent. Kevin, chime in. I forgot the date. In 24, you said June of 2024. 2024. I think school communities are going to craft amazing plans. Some of them are going to work exceptionally, and they're going to become models for other schools that are going to want to be like, hey, school X did this, and I want to do that. And we will have some neat data to go behind that, right? So we will be like, I wonder why Matta Woman, like their scores are really bumping up. The kids from the spring, from the fall assessments to the winter assessments are doing really, really well in this program. Can we replicate it? So part of this should also be a jump start for us to think about how do we do work differently? How is it that we think about school hours and other hours where kids can be learning? And I think that's a negotiation and conversation with families. I think that's part of what we learned. One of the things that we've learned through as well is what is, and thank you for, I know I'm putting on the chat and Charmaine's putting on the chat, so feel free to grab in there too for presentations. But that's what we want to do. If the more that we talk to communities at the community level, the more we can find innovative ways to do it, because at Higdon is going to be very different than Jennifer. They're just in different situations. Higdon has a lot of connectivity issue. Mount Hope has a lot of connectivity issues, but their communities, like if you need them to do something, they organize much, much quicker as a community because they've had to for so many reasons. Natural disasters, connectivity issues. So they really connect really quickly. And then you have Jennifer, a new community. We have a lot of new members to the community, like myself, right? English language learners. And so we have to understand what that community wants to say. Community conversations that we can have at Jennifer, for example, in Spanish, where parents understand this whole presentation in simple terms with Spanish. What would they like to see? Could we do, some support of biliteracy so that we support the language development of English, but also while supporting the bilingual and biliteracy support that we now know impacts, and research says impacts students learning progressively throughout. So I want this to be an opportunity for schools to really think creatively, and I expect that we will learn as we are using up some of the money, and some things may not necessarily work. and some things may work, and we're going to just have to document the things that did not and the expansion of things that do back to the Fed.
And I love that transparency aspect of it as well. I would love to plant that seed and also ask if that transparency can be given to families as well. We know that with data, it takes about a year for it to get to the federal level. So parents and families don't see it until a year later. And it's hard for us to adjust or move with the plan if we don't know what worked or what didn't work. So just putting that thought out there. My last question, because I see two other parents that would like to speak, is if we could see the high level plan as well on the CCPOE ESSER page. It was greatly broken down what things are spent on, but to see the full plan that went to MSDE would be great as well. Thank you.
Maureen Mears, you have a question? Miss Mears, are you there? I can see that you're adjusting your audio. Are you there?
Not working. Hello?
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, so thank you. I just want to pick up on what Dr. Navarro just said. Is there any plans right now to build in some of that learning loss time or intervention time into the school day at the high school level, bringing back some of the activity times so the students have the clubs, the intervention, the tutoring during school hours? And then the other thing for Ms. Hungerford, what is the assessment tool being used in kindergarten if I-80 starts at first grade?
This is Kevin Lowndes. I'll speak a little bit about the high school. So at the high schools, many of our high school principals have adjusted their schedules to fit in this activity time during the school day. And so I'm suggesting that if your high school has not done so, please contact your principal and see if they have plans to do so. Because I believe almost all of them, if not all of them, at the last principals meeting that we had either plans to do so or had already redone their schedule to fit some activity time in. Originally, they were going to go back to, I believe, the one lunch, but because of the situation with limiting the amount of students within their lunchrooms, that wasn't going to be possible for many of our high schools. So they ended up developing either another small, skinny period during the day, or found another way to provide an opportunity for students to participate in activities during the school day.
Hi, this is Mrs. Hungerford. To address the second question, at the kindergarten level, we have two consistent assessments. The KRA, Kindergarten Readiness Assessment, is administered to all students September through about mid-October. And that measures 4 domains, including reading and math readiness, as well as social, emotional, and physical development. That is an MSDE assessment, and we have completed that. And actually, our early childhood specialist, Mrs. Sorsby, is now visiting each school and meeting with the kindergarten team to look over the data. That gives us very concise and specific measurements about where our students' strengths are as they are entering kindergarten and where we need to work with them closely. In addition, we also have the Acadians Reading Screening Assessment, and that is being administered as we speak, and we have central office supporting that administration. That is specifically in the area of reading readiness, and that is mandated through the Ready to Read Act through MSDE, and that will help us determine if any student is at risk for not being able to succeed at reading at this point in time, and then interventions are put in place. Parents will get notification as the Acadian assessment is concluded as to whether their child looks like they are on a path to be okay, or if they will be receiving intervention. I'm just going to continue because I saw in the chat, what is the intervention time in school for elementary and middle too? I think Ms. Small asked. At the elementary level, we have really 2 times during the day. One is during the guided reading block. That's a 60-minute block. And students are in rotations with 20 minutes directly with the teachers. And then the other 40 minutes is either activities directly related to the guided reading lesson or a meaningful seat work activity. That 40 minutes can also be utilized for students needing intervention with people, teachers, staff, IAs pushing in or pulling out for that time. Our math block is a 90-minute block. 60 minutes is core instruction, and then 30 minutes, which is the last 30 minutes of the lesson, generally is designated as small group differentiated instruction. So we have a time there for intervention. We have a time there for reinforcement, and for some of our students, of course, we have a time there for enrichment if they are achieving at the grade level standards and need a little broadening enrichment and acceleration of their learning.
Thank you, Ms. Hungerford. And with that, we're going to conclude our evening. I see that 2 of you still have your hands up, and and we're happy to answer those questions if you would like to email me directly, or I will be glad to get you the answers that you want. But I just want to thank everyone tonight for participating in this community event. And I want you to please fill out the survey. We're going to look at that survey. We'll take it very seriously. It's great input for us to move forward with the spending with the ESSER plans. And please participate in your school community evenings when they're talking about the plans that they have going forward. In talking to some of the principals, I know some of them plan on sending out surveys, while others plan on having and speaking to it at the PTSO meetings, and others plan on having separate community meetings. So I know they all are coming up with ways in which to address their communities to get some input on their plans going forward. And once again, I want to thank you all tonight very much for attending this community evening, for us to let you know how we're spending the money or how we spent the money already, but also get input on how we should be spending the money in the future. Thank you and have a great evening.